Different sewing machine brands may refer to the edge stitch foot as other names, such as a narrow edge foot, an edge joining foot, or a ditch quilting foot. All are synonyms for the edge stitch foot. What an edge stitch foot consists of is a standard looking presser foot with a guide bar or blade between the front toes. This guide is centered in line with the needle in the center needle position. The guide is then placed along a fold, in between two fabric edges or trims, or in the ditch or well of the seam to guide your stitching with perfection. Used in conjunction with multiple needle positions on your machine, you can achieve professionally straight top stitching as well as many other decorative techniques. Oftentimes a blind hem foot will be suggested for use as an edge stitch foot, but the options for the blind hem foot are very limited. On the left is a blind hem foot. Notice the guide goes through the zigzag opening, making the blind hem foot unsuitable for any zigzag or decorative sewing as the threads will swing over the bar and catch, and the needle may even hit the bar. You can do straight stitching only. The same applies to a stitch in the ditch foot on the far right. It has just a straight stitch opening, so you can only do a straight stitch and only in the central needle position. No adjustments can be made. This is why the edge stitch foot center is your very best option anytime you want to stitch along an edge or in the ditch. You have the full zigzag opening to position the needle for straight stitching or decorative stitching. The edge stitch foot works by two methods. Either the blade rides in the well of the seam or the blade runs along an edge. We'll first look at stitching along an edge. When a blade runs along a fabric edge, you must be able to move the needle position on your sewing machine. Most sewing machines have at least a left and a right of center needle position, and most have several more. The more needle positions your machine has, the more accuracy and variety you have in your top stitching. The machine we used in these samples has 4 positions, both left and right of center, which gives plenty of options for varying the look for different techniques. Stitching in the ditch is the second method of how an edge stitch foot works. Stitching in the ditch is a technique to almost invisibly attach 2 or more layers of fabric together, used so often in quilting, but has many uses in its origin of fashion sewing. Whether you are taking up a hem at the side seams or assembling the quilt layers, place the blade of the edge stitch foot in the well of the seam. Use a short stitch length and matching thread, or even monofilament thread for even less visible results, and stitch. In this sample we used contrasting thread, otherwise the stitching hides so well there would be nothing to show. Edge stitching pockets, cuffs, and collars are the main places garment sewers will benefit from the edge stitch foot. A consistent width between the stitching and the fabric edge is the hallmark of a finely tailored shirt, and the edge stitch foot is the only way to get this look effortlessly. The foot's central guide lets you top stitch precisely, even at faster speeds. A Hong Kong finish is a couture technique that is excellent for finishing an unlined jacket where the seams will show, but a simple overlocked edge finish won't be as attractive as you would like. After sewing the bias strip to the seam allowance, turn the strip to the wrong side and with the edge stitch foot, stitch in the ditch to keep the binding wrapped to the back. Trim off any surplus binding fabric and press the seam open. Now you not only have the most durable edge finish available, but you can also have a design element in the contrast of fabric used. Decorative top stitching makes or breaks a garment. Leave the top stitching off and the garment can need a little polishing, but do a poor job top stitching and the garment will scream homemade. Never worry about even professional top stitching again when you have an edge stitch foot. For this sample, we centered the blade of the foot in the well of the pressed open seam. We then moved the needle position to one side and stitched. We moved the needle position to the other side the same distance and stitched again. For a more pronounced look, use 2 threads to top stitch with, or use a heavier weight thread, or use the triple straight stitch on your machine to give the stitching an extra heavy look. On this sample, the seam was pressed to one side and then edge stitched. Move the needle slightly over the seam approximately 1/16 of an inch and sew. A single row of edge stitching gives a more tailored look. For a sportier look, add a second row of top stitching. You can leave the edge stitch foot in place, but you won't be utilizing the guide. Follow the edge of the foot and sew the second row. Perfectly parallel rows of top stitching that look like even better than what you see in most ready-to-wear. Understitching is a basic sewing fundamental that seems to have been forgotten in so many of today's sewing tutorials, Yet forget to do it and your handmade garment suddenly looks homemade. Understitching is a simple row of stitching that attaches a seam allowance of a facing to the facing, giving a crisp edge in which to turn and press the facing. This keeps the facing from peeking out to the right side. After sewing on your facing, grade and trim the seam allowance and press the seam allowance toward the facing. Attach the edge stitch foot and move the needle to stitch about 1/16 of an inch from the facing and sew. Now the seam has become more secure and that facing is now going to stay inside the garment where it belongs. Pintucks are mostly associated today with using twin needles. While twin needles will make beautiful pintucks, nothing looks quite as elegant as pintucks made the traditional way, by folding the fabric and stitching along the edge. But how can you get the stitching so close to an edge and keep it straight? With the edge stitch foot, of course. Press all rows necessary to make your tucks, snap on the edge stitch foot, and move your needle position to the desired distance from the fold and sew. Then press all of your tucks to one side, and there you will have the timeless look of pintucks with even less work than setting up for twin needle pintucks. Ribbons and other thin trims can be easily attached with the edge stitch foot. For sewing on heavier trims such as braiding, webbing, or Velcro, see our video for the bi-level presser foot set, and visit our store, thecolorfulworldofsewing.com, to purchase this set of feet. They work hand in hand with the edge stitch foot for perfectly even top stitching on heavier weight fabrics and trims. To sew a ribbon in place, move the needle to the desired width and sew with a straight stitch. Use a matching or contrasting thread depending on the look you like. Or you can use a decorative stitch, such as this pin stitch. We move the needle position so the right-hand swing of the stitch falls just off the edge of the ribbon and the horizontal threads run into the ribbon, totally changing the look of the trim. To stitch two laces together, first heavily spray starch and iron the laces to give them more body. This will make sewing so much easier. Then butt one lace to each side of the blade in the edge stitch foot. Use a zigzag stitch with a medium width and length or as desired to sew the laces together. The blade of the edge stitch foot keeps the laces perfectly placed, not too far apart and not riding on top of each other. In matching thread, the seam will blend right in and you will be able to build all of your favorite heirloom trims easily with the use of the edge stitch foot. Sewing lace to a fabric edge is just as easy. Press under the hem allowance the lace will be joined to. Use the same setting and technique, and in seconds you will have lace attached just as perfectly to a fabric edge. Even today's basic sewing machines have more decorative stitches than people know what to do with. Doing crazy quilt stitching over your patchwork seams is a fun way to utilize those decorative stitches, but also give your quilt a one-of-a-kind look. After sewing your patchwork seams, press them open and layer your top, batting, and backing. Stitch decorative stitches over the seams centering the blade of the edge stitch foot in the ditch of the seam. The edge stitch foot gives beautifully balanced stitches throughout your quilt project. Oh, the wonderful edge stitch foot. No sewer should be without one, because when you know how and where to use it, it will be one of your most reached for presser feet in your accessory box. These are just some of the versatile techniques that can be done with an edge stitch foot. We're certain that if you asked around, other people have found their own uses for this essential presser foot. TheColorfulWorldOfSewing.com has edge stitch feet for all brands of sewing machines, as well as a full line of accessories and hard to find notions and more to make your world of sewing come alive each time you sew. Stop by soon and find out why we're the best sewing machine accessory store on the internet. We have a full range of the best sewing machine accessories, and we use and know more about the products we sell than any other store. Guaranteed.